This is not just a seasonal shift, it is a fundamental change in the dynamic that has driven the rise of emerging markets for several decades now. The basic laws of economic gravity are already pulling China, Russia, Brazil, and other big emerging markets back to earth. The first is the law of large numbers, which says that the richer a country is, the harder it is to grow national wealth at a rapid pace. China and many other big emerging markets are following an export-driven growth model similar to those adopted by Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan after World War II. All these boom economies began to slow from 9 or 10% growth to around 5 or 6% when their per capita income levels reached upper middle income levels, which the World Bank defines as a country with a per capita income of $4,000 or more in current dollar terms. Japan hit that wall in the mid-1970s. Taiwan and South Korea hit it over the subsequent 2 decades. Note that these are the greatest success stories in the history of economic development, so they represent the best case scenario. In all 3 cases, the major warning sign of a slowdown was what economists call structural inflation. There a sudden rise in worker demands for higher pay, indicating that there was no longer a bottomless pool of labor available to staff the export factories at rock bottom wages. China exceeded the $4,000 mark in 2010, just as the latest outbreak of labor strikes for higher wages was accelerating. Yet many observers still choose to believe that China can blow beyond the $4,000 barrier at double-digit speed. At the same time, investors in the West have lost faith in the dynamism of the United States and Europe and are turning east and south partly in desperation. In 2009 and 2010, hundreds of billions of dollars went into emerging market funds that made little or no distinction between Poland and Peru, India and Indonesia. Such macromania and obsession with global macro trends operate on the assumption into bracket at least temporarily correct during the boom years end bracket. That knowledge of the broad movement in the world economy is all you need to evaluate any particular asset class. The result is that the prices of stock in all the mainstream emerging markets have been moving together in increasingly synchronized formations. In the first half of 2011, the difference between the best performing and the worst performing major stock market in the world in the emerging world was just 10%, an all-time low and a dangerous indicator of hard behavior. This is exactly the same mistake the world made in the run-up to the ASEAN crisis of 1997 to 1998, when all the emerging tiger economies were seen one way or another as the next Japan, encouraged by Wall Street marketers and best-selling books. Today, many analysts and investors are thinking big about the shift of wealth from the West to the East and coming convergence of rich and poor nations. The idea that the average incomes of emerging nations are rapidly catching up to those of rich nations. This is a great sales gimmick, but distorts the reality, which is that the emerging markets could not be more different from one another. For a start, these nations are all over the development map. Russia, Brazil, Mexico, and Turkey, with average incomes above $10,000, have much lower growth potential than India, Indonesia, and the Philippines, whose average incomes are well under $5,000. But high incomes do not necessarily translate into technological strength. Hungary is in the same income class as Brazil and Mexico, but 90% of Hungarians have access to mobile communications compared with only 40% of Brazilians and Mexicans. The death load of emerging markets vary widely. Even recent success stories like China and South Korea carry as heavy a burden of personal and business loans relative to GDP and many troubled developed countries. The typical South Korean has more than 3 credit cards and carries a debt larger than the average annual income, while fewer than 1 in 3 Brazilians have even one card. The nature of emerging market vulnerability to troubles in the West also takes many forms. Many Asian countries still depend on export to the West, while several Eastern European countries rely more on lending from the West to fund growth.